Okay, thank you, Richard. I'm now going to bring up the second of tonight's guests, an actual flesh human who is here in actual person to speak to us. It's Mr. Simon Boswell. So, Simon, I wondered when and how you were first introduced to Richard Stanley.
Well, along with many British filmmakers, actually, Richard thought that I was Italian because I'd begun my career in Italy working with Dario Argento. So he actually called, a lot of people got me confused with Claudio Simonetti. Okay. Also because I worked with him on the first movie I ever did, I worked with The Remains of Goblin. But Richard called Dario's office in Rome and asked him to put them in touch with me, and Dario said, but he lives in London. So, which I did, and that's how we met. And I met on the set of Hardware with Richard, which was being filmed in the Roundhouse in Camden, and yeah, that's how we met.
I mean, what was the mood like filming a low-budget killer robot movie in the Roundhouse? Must have been a pretty kind of unusual setup.
It was unusual, and it's interesting because, you know, I'd been there, you know, years before to see bands. I think the last band I saw was The Who doing Tommy, you know. And then when I went back, you know, years later, it was a complete wreck. I mean, the Roundhouse was an absolutely dilapidated wreck. So it was, the rain was sort of dripping through the floors and stuff. It was quite incredible. But Richard, you know, when we started working on the thing, he's about the only director ever that I've ever worked with who asked me to write some music that he could play to the actors whilst they were filming. Most directors, and I completely understand this, don't have time to even think about music when they're shooting their movies. But Richard sort of took the trouble to play, you know, some of what I was doing to the actors just to show them that there was someone else going on, I guess. And that's the best a film composer can ever hope for, I think.
Did kind of being on the sets and seeing presumably some rough footage of the film, did that immediately spark musical ideas in your head?
Well, I mean, I knew, you know, I read the script, so I knew what it was about. But, you know, the whole thing was very, very dim and filled with smoke, is my recollection of the Roundhouse at the time.
What kind of smoke?
Well, yeah, every kind of smoke, as you can imagine. But, you know, the thing for me, you know, and as a film composer, is something that you know, I always react like the pianist at Simon movie when I first see rushes or clips of a movie. You know, Hardware was no exception in the sense that I saw these clips of a guy walking through the desert. Yeah. Dressed very much like Richard Stanley.
Yeah.
And you know, my immediate thought was, it's sand, desert. It seems, you know, this is not exactly Lawrence of Arabia, but it felt more to me, and I fully acknowledged this at the time, more like Paris, Texas in a kind of way, some sort of lone guy striding through the sand, which is why I decided to put slide guitar on the soundtrack. Yeah. Which I think, as it turns out, with the story is kind of quite appropriate. It's a very kind of low-tech future we've got, maybe with no electricity. So, you know, one acoustic guitar seemed to work. You know.
Did Richard have quite clear ideas of what he wanted, or were you just given free rein to do whatever?
No, absolutely free rein. I mean, no. Richard had very clear ideas about some of the tracks he wanted in the film, like Ministry. You know, and the public image track that is on the titles. Yeah. So, but apart from that, no, he gave me completely.
That must be a pretty pleasurable thing.
Well, you know, it's, I guess my career, I've sort of steered my own course towards directors and movies who are prepared to do that for me, because I've been in recording sessions with sort of big name composers in big movies with huge orchestras. I've done some of that myself, but I've seen how uncomfortable it is to be in a room full of 20 executives from Los Angeles, all having their own say.
Okay, finally, the music's got, I mean, the film's got quite a lot of musicians involved. Obviously, Carl McCoy's in the first scene and Lemmy's in it, and the voice of Iggy Pop. Did you meet those guys? Did you
I met Lemmy when we were doing it. There's a whole story attached to that. I could perhaps tell you very quickly.
Please tell us, and then
well,
we'll
because
get to
Lemmy appears as a character in the film as a sort of a river taxi driver, and I was asked to go down and discuss with him about using Ace of Spades in the film. So I was dispatched to his flat. He was living in Hammersmith at this time, and it was about midday, and I knocked on the door. I was with Ian, who was the music supervisor on this. We knocked on the door, and we couldn't get any answer. We knocked and knocked and knocked, and eventually this window opens. Lenny sticks his head out like this, and said, "What?" And we said, "We're here about half." He came down and opened the door, and he was wearing just a sort of baby doll nightgown like this. And he said, "You want some coffee?" We said, "Yeah, okay." He said, sit down. I've got to show you something." And Lemmy is a famous collector of Nazi memorabilia and stuff. So he put into the VHS machine a video which he wanted to show us of Nazi executions. But the thing was that he was wearing this little thing, and as he bent down, he put the thing in like this. My abiding memory is of looking up Lemmy's arse.
And on that bombshell, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
It's really good to talk about that.
Buy Simon's Records and go and see his band, The And, who are playing around and are generally awesome.
We will be, yeah.
Yeah. So